I have personally have worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years. And in those years, I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes take for granted. Nonprofit Insider is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. Before we start today's show, I want to give a special shout out to Frankie, who will be moving to Boston sometime in August. So good luck, Frankie. And you know what we forgot? We forgot to do the weather.
That's my job.
That's your job.
Well, today, David, it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and it feels like 30. It's 34, and it feels like 32. Tomorrow, it's going to be 40 degrees, and we can look forward to snow, which is very exciting. Sunday, 34 degrees and snow, and by Monday, we'll be back to 43 degrees and clear.
Well, that's exciting. So at some point, spring will be here. And our weather forecaster today is also our guest, Patty Kimball. Patty is the Executive Director of the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine. That's a long title.
It is a very long title.
So how are you?
I'm good.
Haven't seen you in a long time.
It's been a while.
Yeah?
It's been a while.
Yeah, you nervous right now?
I am a little bit nervous, yeah.
What can we do to relax you?
I think let's just keep talking.
Okay, we can do that. So tell us about the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine is. What's it all about?
I would be glad to. One of my favorite subjects. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. We've been around since 2011. I was brought on in 2012 as the first executive director to get this organization off the ground. And what we do, David, is we focus really on alternatives to our punitive justice system. So restorative justice is a fairly simple concept with a long name, which says that we are typically in the criminal justice world, when somebody commits an act of harm or crime, the state takes over and punishment is decided by the state. With restorative justice, what we say is that certain crimes are crimes between people and they affect relationships. And so what better way to resolve those conflicts than have people sit down and talk to each other? So we bring victims and offenders together when it's appropriate, and it's all voluntary, so both offender and a victim have to be interested in this, and their restitution or reparation for the crime committed is decided among the people that were impacted. So that's sort of the general concept of restorative justice. It's popular and has been accepted by criminal justice professionals in the state, also nationally and internationally, as an alternative to our current punitive justice system. So it answers a lot of the, it's an answer to a lot of the problems that we're experiencing in the criminal justice system right now.
So when you talk about punitive justice, what does that define? What's the definition of that?
Well, when somebody commits a crime, and we'll talk about crime, although restorative justice has implications far beyond the criminal justice world. Our system takes over, so generally somebody gets arrested, they get prosecuted, and our typical means of punishment is incarceration. A lot of times what we see in schools with detention and expulsion, those are also punitive measures. And while they certainly fit the needs of the state, and they also fit the needs of victims at times, we find that there are a lot of victims who want answers to why something happened to them. They want to understand what was going on in the mind of the offender when a certain thing happened. So restorative justice provides that alternative.
So is this currently happening in the state now?
It is happening in the state. Sure. We are actually working in 8 different communities across the state. We're working to get projects up and running and provide services. We do a lot of work with juveniles. This is because of the developmental milestones that adolescents walk through. Restorative justice really has potential to help developmentally young people think about the impact of their behavior on others. So the work is going on around the state. We do the work in 8 different communities. There are also there's the Restorative Justice Project of the Mid-Coast that is up in Belfast in Prosecutorial District 6, and they do amazing work and have been around for 10 years, so they're doing that work in that region. And then schools are jumping on board. We have trainers through the Restorative Practices Collaborative who go out and train schools to use this practice in educational settings as well.
What are the results? I mean, are they measurable that you can actually see benefits to the community?
They are measurable. What we find sort of across the board is that victims, this is a process that is embraced by victims, those victims who want to be part of it, that their satisfaction with the justice system is much greater when they go through a restorative process than when they don't. So we see an impact on victims. We also see cost benefit to systems when restorative justice is used, and we also see lower recidivism rates. I will say that we are looking and focusing much more heavily than we have in the past on research to really identify the indicators that show that restorative justice has positive impact. So we look at developmental assets as well.
Is there a lot of research out there supporting the work?
There is research. Is there a lot of research? Not necessarily. A lot of the work that has been done, it grows organically when people find out about this work, which is pretty exciting, to be honest. I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second. I've been in the nonprofit world for 25 years and have worked on a number of really important social causes. And a lot of the work I've had to do is advocate for these causes and sort of say, this is a problem. Do you understand this is a problem? So there's a lot of advocacy work. This work, there's not a lot of, and this is in quotes, selling. People are very, very interested. So we actually have more demand than we have capacity to serve. I say that in response to your question about research. So there's a lot of projects, there's a lot of initiatives all over the country that have sort of been born of people's need to see this work in practice, and the evaluation and research component hasn't been top of the mind. So I think it's an area where we need to do a little bit better in terms of research.
I think it would be helpful, because we've talked a lot of conceptual about the organization, but can you walk us through how the process would work?
Sure.
From the time the person's arrested so we can put it in real terms?
Sure. Well, I'll say about restorative justice, it can be used along the continuum. So we can use the process as a prevention method if people, and they do this a lot in schools, that you start using what we call a circle process, which is a way of having a conversation that values everybody's voice. When work is done in school settings, in organizational settings, we can actually prevent. It can actually be a prevention tool. So it can be used that way. If it can be used as an alternative to somebody being arrested for a crime, so it can be diverted from the system. We can use restorative justice as diversion. It can also be used as a referral from the criminal justice system. And finally, it can be used post-incarceration. So there are benefits to using restorative justice as a reentry tool. So I'll talk a little bit about somebody who might be arrested or charged for a crime. So let's say you have a young person who has stolen something from a store. I'll use a very simple example.
Works.
We might get a referral from a police officer. We might get a referral from a loss prevention specialist at a retail store. We might get a referral from a juvenile correctional officer who has received a case from a law enforcement officer. What we do then is offer this alternative. So the first criteria that the case has to meet is that the offender admits that they did something wrong and is willing to take accountability for that. So we talk to those folks. We talk to the people that were victimized. So in the case of a retail store, it might be a store owner, it might be a loss prevention specialist, it might be anybody else that's impacted in a retail environment. We ask them if they are open to the process as well, and then we do what we call pre-work. We interview people. We talk to them about what the process is going to look like. We ask them to tell us their story so we know where they're coming from, and they know where we're coming from and what the process might look like. ultimately, and the most common practice in the state that people are familiar with is called a conference. And so we bring together the victim and offender. We often will have, and there could be multiple victims, we often have support people for both parties. And we come together in a circle. It is facilitated by practitioners who are trained in this practice and who have practiced quite a bit, so they have a high level of skill. And essentially, they're asked some very simple questions. The offender is asked a series of questions about what they did, what they were thinking at the time, what kind of impact they thought they had, and what did they think they needed to do to make that right. So that the offender hears that, the offenders, the people impacted, hear that directly from the offender. And then support people are asked similar questions, so offenders understand what people that they are close to felt, and then the victims are asked a series of questions. So really, it's a chance to tell the story of what was going on. Once that's complete and everybody sort of hears from everybody's perspective, and again, it's not a free for all. It's a scripted process that allows people to be in a safe environment. And a lot of the pre-work prepares them so that it is safe. They're not going into something they don't know. Then jointly they come up with a reparation agreement. So they decide what needs to be done to rectify the situation. What does the offender need to do to make it right? The key for this process is that the victims actually have a voice in that. So the reparation agreements can be very creative, and the offender has to agree to it. It has to be something that's within their capacity to do. So we write up a contract. Everybody agrees to it. The person has 8 to 12 weeks to finish their assignment, their reparation agreement. Once that's complete, they come back together. They talk about what they did, and if everybody is satisfied, that feels a sense of satisfaction in the process, then the case is closed, essentially. So that's what the process looks like. It's amazing. It's interesting. You can talk about it in theory.
We're going to have to take a break in about a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
No, keep going.
It's amazing to witness one of these, I'll say a conference, one of these conferences, the transformation that happens when somebody tells their story about what they were doing, and when a victim who may come in incredibly angry hears from an offender. They may still be angry, but just understanding the story behind it, and then having to have somebody that committed an act actually sit through and listen to the impact they had. It's a very transformative process.
And you've been to one of these circles?
I have, yes.
Okay. So we're at, believe it or not, we're at our midpoint identifier at this point, and before we do that, we have our trivia question.
Oh, no.
I know.
Is it a test?
Of course.
Okay.
So very few people get the trivia question. A lot of times it has absolutely nothing to do with anything, but I actually have one kind of related to what we're talking about right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask the question, then we'll go to the midpoint identifier, and then you can give me your answer.
Okay.
You ready? What is the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of men? Is it 1 in 9, 1 in 32, or 1 in 56? I'll let you think about it for a minute. This is Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and this is listener-supported WMPG 90.9 and 104.1 FM, community radio of Southern Maine and Eastern New Hampshire. Today we have Patty Kimball, Executive Director of the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine. And the trivia question was, what is the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of all men? 1 in 9, 1 in 32, 1 in 56.
I'm going to suggest a scary answer to that question, which is 1 in 9.
It is. You're absolutely right. So I'm going to ask you a second trivia question, which I usually don't do, but what would it be for women? 1 in 9, 1 in 32, or 1 in 56?
Well, the incarceration rate for women is lower, so I'm going to go with 1 in 56.
Boy, you're good. You got them both. And this is according to the Sentencing Project as of September 2014. Those are pretty scary numbers, especially for men, that 1 in 9 men would be incarcerated at some point.
Yeah. What's also, two points about that. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other country in the world.
I saw that when I did the research.
Which a lot of people don't realize. And so I think when people hear that statistic, they step back and say, what does that mean? What does that really mean? You can say either our folks in our country are worse
Right.
Or you can say that there's something systemically funky about that, about our system. I choose the latter, and I think there are ways to resolve that. I think a lot of people know that there are ways to resolve that. The other point is that while women's incarceration rate is lower, the number of women that have been incarcerated in the last 2 decades has really skyrocketed.
Yeah, if you go look at the report that I saw, the numbers in the last 10 years even have just been astronomically high based on the charts. They're kind of flatlined for 10 years, and all of a sudden they just peak.
Yeah.
So it's wild stuff.
Well, and also the sort of the impact of that, not just on the people that are incarcerated, but on their families. So if you're a mom with some kids and you end up incarcerated, there's an impact on those kids as well.
Right. It's a trickle-down effect all around. So let's talk a little bit about the organization itself. I just got all caught up here on my wire. It's a fairly new organization. What were some of the trials and tribulations or a aha moment that you had?
Do we have an hour?
Well, we have
2.
No, we have 10 minutes left actually. So let's do the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Anybody that started an organization, whether it's nonprofit, a small business, a large business, I mean, the challenges are many. I think I think a vision and a strategy are 2 very different things. So starting an organization with a vision and putting that vision into strategic operations is always a challenge. How is this going to work? And we really, I mean, our mission is to really change the culture in the state of Maine and to really see Maine become a restorative state, which means that we use restorative practices across the spectrum, across a number of sectors. How do you make that work? Right? Like that, how do you make it work? How do you do that? How do you operationalize that? That, I think, was a huge challenge to our beginnings. And then the very concrete challenges of putting together a business. Where are your funding sources
right.
today? Where are your funding sources 10 years from now? What kind of staff do you need? How do you communicate your message as a new organization? How do you find your place in the market? What is your place as an organization? How much service do you provide directly? How much capacity building do you do? How much do you rely on experts in the field? How much do you rely on internal expertise? So I don't think it's different than any other organization. I think the challenge is really putting together a solid business plan and having a clear understanding of what your operations are going to look like.
I'm kind of intrigued in your choice of words. You took it out of the traditional nonprofit model and you put it into a fairly business model. So are you saying that you're finding that running a nonprofit's like running a business?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Oh, absolutely. But,
Yeah.
A lot of execs, especially of smaller organizations, don't see it as such.
Yeah.
You really have to have that insight.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, right? Because our bottom line is not necessarily our bottom line. Would be retained assets at the end of the year, so that we can move into the next year with some funding. But our bottom line is the number of people we are able to serve. So it's our capacity as well, right. And sort of the double bottom line. Makes it complicated. It's also not, it would be great if all of our work could be done fee for service, so we could actually recoup costs, and you can't do that. So in a world where you're relying on outside funding sources that you have to court, that you have to budget based on projections and not necessarily what you know is going to come in. It's a tricky business plan. It's a really tricky business plan.
Especially, when you don't sell widgets and you can't project how many widgets you're going to sell in a year, but you take a guess of how much money you're going to raise.
And you have to build a foundation that's solid, because you aren't fly by night. You need to have a solid foundation. You need to have a solid foundation to garner trust from your constituencies, and you need to have a solid foundation in order to bring other people on. Staffing and how people. There's their livelihood questions. It's hard to ask people to come on board and buy into a grand vision if you don't have the foundation to be able to support them longer term.
Right. What's been your most significant aha moment that just caught you off guard and you just couldn't believe it was happening? In this organization, we can talk about past stuff too.
Well, sometimes I think I wake up every day and it's a aha, right?
That's one way of looking at it. Every day
that I wake up and I walk in, I say, "Oh, today's a new day," and aha, I've made it.
Or at least I woke up today.
Yeah, it's a grand accomplishment. I think, gosh, what would be? That's a hard one. I think for me, the probably in this particular field, in the work we're doing right now, I think we have to keep up with interest, that very many people are interested in this work. We can't do everything we want to do because we don't have capacity to do it all. So my biggest aha moment, I tend to be a big ideas person, and I love creative, generative thinking and talking and coming up with new ways of doing business. I think the biggest aha for me is that sometimes that's actually scary, and sometimes you actually have to slow down those creative neurons that are firing and say, what is it possible for us to do, right. And how can we keep everybody on board moving in the same direction without being crazy with great ideas. So when you're in a field like this, there's more than you can do, that you have capacity, and so sort of slowing down. I think for me, given my personality and given my interest, that personally, that was an aha.
I mean, I've known you for several years now, and this is the second organization I've seen you involved with, and your energy level is just incredible. I mean, I don't know how your board keeps up with you.
Well, sometimes kicking and screaming.
But it happens.
I have a fabulous board, by the way.
You do. What do you think if you had to pick one success of this organization so far, what would it be?
Well, one of our beliefs about none of my answers can be short. So if you give me the nod, I'll cut my story short.
Okay.
One of the things that we really believe is that in order for this work to flourish, it has to be embedded in community, and that it can't be a sort of an outside practice or intervention or thing that comes in and sort of is overlaid into a community. So we've spent a lot of hours and brain power trying to figure out how to build a community, programs that are really embedded and involve multiple layers of the community. So district attorneys, sheriffs, school officials, nonprofit leaders. And so we've come up with a really, what I think is an amazing, sound strategy to engage community in this work. And this is when I mentioned earlier, we're in 8 different communities building what we call community justice collaboratives. And the purpose of those collaboratives is to advise on how restorative justice will play out in their community based on the needs of their community, which they know because it is their community, mm-hmm. It's not ours. So that's a project that I feel really, really proud of. It took a long time for us to figure out how do we go from sort of a community development concept to how do you make that real. And we've come up with what I think is a fabulous strategy for working in community and making sure that this work gets to people that need it in a way that matches community resources and community needs in the way that's going to be sustained long term.
Do you find any resistance?
Yeah, I think there's always, it's change, and this sounds trite, but there's always resistance to change. People are used to doing things a certain way. We all have certain mindsets about, when somebody does something wrong, this is what should happen. What's really gratifying with this work is that when you sit down and dig a little bit deeper with people, even with people that have been victimized or are victims of crime, what they, we can't project what they want, and giving them space to answer that question for themselves is really gratifying. So, of course, we have resistance. There are ways of operating that this sort of calls into question, and in that case, yes, we do have resistance. But I will go back to that we've got a lot of people that see the sort of the inherent common sense of this kind of an approach and are interested in getting involved.
Do you see that sometimes the victims may be a little bit intimidated sitting in the room?
Yeah, and we we spend a lot of time in pre-work meeting with people, and if we ever felt like it was a situation where somebody would be intimidated, we wouldn't go forward with it. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all problems in all society, in our entire society, and it's also not. It's not right for every case. So it requires people to feel safe, and that's our primary concern is to make sure that the environment we create for them is a safe one. So if somebody feels intimidated, it may not be the right process for them.
Do you have any questions for me? Because I've been asking you all the questions.
If I said no, you would think I wasn't interested in what you're doing, David.
No.
I guess I would ask about this sort of forum for sharing nonprofit work. How did you come up with this idea?
Actually, it was the idea of Deb Danger, our engineer, who's out sick today. But we were on the WMPG board together, and she kept saying you ought to do a show, and I bounced it around and did an audition, and here I am. But it's been a great forum for nonprofits. The feedback has been really good from the community because, people are able to tell their story in a different way than a fundraising event or, through a campaign. But just hear what you do and what's good, what's bad, and what's ugly about it. So.
Yeah, it's great. It's not always party conversation. People, I have very supportive friends and family, but if you're not in the nonprofit world dealing with it every single day, it's not something I tend to talk about too much outside of my professional circle. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. Oh,
it's our pleasure, and hopefully the goal is that more people would learn about your work.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to find out more about your work and how to contact you, how would they do that?
They would go to our website, www. Do we still have to say that?
I think so.
I think so too. RJI Maine, like in the state, .org, and we encourage them to check out our website. Give us any feedback on our website as well. Where it's
actually a very good website.
Thank you.
All your websites are good.
Thank you. And we have a sign up to be on our mailing list. We won't inundate you with inappropriate emails, but we will keep you up to date. We're doing if I have a second, one of the things we're really trying to do very strategically is get the conversation about justice and the impact of the justice system on everyday folks. We're trying to move that conversation beyond sort of the usual suspects, and so we do things called Just Conversations, where we bring in speakers to talk about justice, and we're doing one on April 20th. Am I allowed to say this?
Yeah.
On April 20th at Space Gallery, we're bringing an author in, a woman who wrote a book and is doing a book on her experience with the justice system. I can't say that?
No, you can't.
Really?
No, you can't.
Okay. Anyway, it's an open to the public event, and we do things like that around the state.
Great. And you have a donation page on your website.
We do.
Let's go hit that button, okay? Speaking of donations, next week is our special Begathon show. Was that a good lead-in, Zach, or what? Is our special Begathon week for WMPG, so join us because we have a couple of surprises. And so that'll be that. And our music is courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You can find Mike's music on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see who he's playing this weekend. Thanks to Deb Danger, NPI's executive engineer. You can catch Deb on Morning Street Fridays at 6:30. And thanks to Zach for filling in for Deb today. If you know a nonprofit that should be on the show, please email me at nonprofitinsider@davidunger.net. Nonprofit Insiders on Facebook. Please post questions and suggest other nonprofits you could be on. And all past shows are archived at www.tcmgr.com, Nonprofit Insider tab.
Growing, growing, growing. I've grown too big for tourist towns. Yeah,